The fight for Aswan. At the behest of the deceased citizens of Aswan, the Alliance launched its forces in order to liberate the city from Hilla. They succeeded in taking back Aswan and driving Hilla out, thus gaining access to the lost city's countless treasures. After Hilla disappeared, it was believed that she had left Mapleworld for good. Author's note: this is supposed to be Fight for Aswan, which was removed from the game. Hilla being driven from Mapleworld forever comes from the Labyrinth of Suffering storyline, in which the adversary is surprised to see Hilla and voices aloud their surprise because they were under the impression that she had been driven from Mapleworld for good. Originally, I thought to place this section after Phantom storyline, since Fight for Aswan was released in the same patch as him, and it made sense that those events to happen in parallel. However, if we take Hilla leaving Mapleworld for good literally, that would place this section right after Zero storyline, which is canonically the last time that we ever see Hilla in Mapleworld. Hilla does appear one more time before Tenebris in the Dimensional Invasion storyline, but that technically happens on Grandis. Realistically, the whole thing about her leaving Mapleworld for good was probably meant to be interpreted as her going underground. Technically, that interpretation would allow for this section to still be placed after Phantom storyline, since her cameo in Zero storyline was an isolated incident that no one in Mapleworld would ever know about. However, I generally try to refrain from ordering sections based on personal speculation. Obviously, some storylines don't have any indication of when they take place, which means that I have to take some liberties. But if they offer some idea of chronological placements, I try to go with those, even in cases like this where it doesn't necessarily have to be taken literally. Soon after, an Alliance member met a wandering mystic who told them a rumor about an elixir of everlasting youth that Hilla had left behind in the ruins of Aswan, as well as the fact that Queen Arita of Ariant had already sent people on a mission to obtain it. Author's note: the wandering mystic is a disguised Hilla. The Alliance member traveled to the ruins of Aswan, where they met an Alliance soldier named Garden. Garden was exasperated to know that the Alliance member had been sent by the Wandering Mystic, whom he explained had been spreading rumors of the elixir all across Mapleworld, causing droves of people to swarm the ruins. He then suggested that the Alliance member visit Medina, the shamaness of Azwan, though he warned that she would appear different from what they might expect. Inside the castle ruins, the Alliance member encountered Medina, whom they were surprised to see was a ghost. Medina explained that Jason, the ghostly king of Aswan, had been reluctant to allow foreign armies to come to Aswan, and so she had been looking for help on her own. She told the Alliance member that the rumors of the elixir had been causing people to pour into Aswan, and that she believed that Hilla was trying to amass her forces in order to bring an evil scheme to fruition. Fearing that the same fate as Aswan would befall Ariant, Medina told the Alliance members how Hilla's quest for everlasting youth had caused the ancient kingdom to fall to ruin, as well as the fact that she likely planned to use those who sought immortality for her own schemes. She then directed the Alliance member to Longorius, the Minister, who tasked them with tracking down several trespassers who had been accessing the underground passageways. The Alliance member entered the passageways and cleared out a horde of grave robbers before encountering two soldiers. Realizing that they were different from the grave robbers, the Alliance member hid behind several boxes and began to eavesdrop. They then overheard the two soldiers, who had been sent by Queen Arita, discussing whether the elixir of everlasting youth was actually real. The pair agreed that it hardly mattered what Arita would claim it for herself. Oh, when Arita would claim it for herself after using them to do her dirty work. Then they shuddered at the thought of having to serve as a mortal Arita, under a mortal Arita, for all eternity. One of the soldiers suggested that he ought to drink the elixir instead, claiming that he was much better looking than Arita. However, the other soldier claimed that he himself was more handsome. The two then began to bicker as the bewildered Alliance member wondered why the two guards were arguing about who looked better when they were identical twins. Just then, a third identical guard appeared and claimed that his face was the one that was truly handsome, causing the Alliance member to realize that they were triplets. The third soldier then reported that he had found the elixir. The Alliance members began to head out to let Medina know what they had discovered, and they were quickly spotted by the triplets. After defeating them, the Alliance member picked up the elixir and noted that it had been marked with ancient Azwan writings. The Alliance member brought the elixir back to Medina, who sensed Hilla's evil energy within the potion. She then translated the inscription as, "The loss of beauty across this fair world so saddens me. I have in my possession the power of immortality, which I shall grant to only the most beautiful souls." Noting that it had also been signed by Hilla herself. After analyzing the components of the potion, however, Medina learned that it was actually extracted obsession and insanity that hid inside the drinker's heart. She then thanked the Alliance member for preventing Hilla's schemes from coming to fruition and asked them to let the Alliance know about the potion. The Alliance member spoke with Garden, who thanked them for their information and promised to place more guards around the passages in order to prevent anyone else from entering. 2 days later, however, Hilla entered Ariant Castle while disguised as the Wandering Mystic and presented the elixir to Arita. Giddy at the prospect of eternal beauty and youth, Arita promised Hilla all the riches in the world before sending her away. As she walked away, Hilla smirked and shed her disguise, claiming that, from Ariant, it will begin again. Author's note: this storyline gets a pseudo-conclusion in the Labyrinth of Suffering storyline. The reason why I say pseudo-conclusion is because it raises more questions than it answers. While stumbling through the labyrinth, the adversary is plagued by visions of despair, in which their allies in Tenebris and the people of Maple World are suffering. One of these visions have them view a conversation between two soldiers of Ariant, Sagati and Ahmed, who are being forced to work like slaves. Ahmed tells Sagati that everything had fallen apart once Arita had found the elixir of youth, causing her greed to grow insatiable. The adversary is surprised because they believed they had given the elixir to Medina. Ahmed then says that many people have begun to leave the city, causing the situation to worsen for those who remained. However, Sagati reveals that people hadn't left, but rather, Arita had imprisoned them in the palace in order to drain their vitality, as she has to keep draining youth from others in order to maintain the effects of the elixir. The scene that flashes to a corrupted Arita being consumed by dark energy as she tells herself that she has to keep draining life, causing the adversary to realize that she's really draining Erda. The canonicity of this vision is left up to your interpretation because, for the most part, every vision inside the labyrinth is an illusion created by Hilla in order to break you. However, this vision seems to be pretty plausible based on what we know happens at the end of the Aswan storyline. Personally, I believe that this one is actually true. All of the other illusions of Maple World's people suffering are stripped away at the end of the storyline, and it's revealed that they've been fighting all along, with the exception of this vision. The only thing I don't like is that we never figure out whether the people of Ariant are saved or not. The whole situation in Ariant has been weird to me from the beginning because of how not a single person in Orev thought to themselves, hey, maybe as the federal government of this world, we should do something about one of our states falling under authoritarian rule. To an extent, there's a fairly reasonable explanation for that. My headcanon has always been that in the centuries since Empress Aria's death, the authority of the Empress has become almost ceremonial at this point. Rev has a senate, but I'd wager that there's a limit to the kinds of laws that it can pass. Plus, who's even left to enforce them? The Noblesse and the Knights of Cygnus, or the Knights of Light, are technically there, but the Noblesse were all wiped out in the war from 300 years ago, and the Knight of Light's power is weakened without an Empress to serve. By the time the Cygnus is coronated, the people of the Maple World have lived without an Empress for over 800 years. Cygnus started out with no army, no authority, and no visibility. On top of that, she was probably somewhere between 5 to 8 years old when she became Empress. Even with Nineheart to help her, she struggled with an inferiority complex for her entire life where she thinks that she's not worthy of being Empress, which means that she's probably terrified of having to be assertive in enforcing the laws of Arev. She probably doesn't want to send the Cygnus Knights to overthrow Arita and risk looking like a tyrant, and Arita definitely isn't going to listen to Cygnus because there's no way that she'll take the words of a child seriously. However, the things I don't understand is why Cygnus still hasn't intervened in the present day. The fact that nearly every citizen in Ariant has been kidnapped by the Queen should be a national level emergency. Even with the fight against the Black Mage going on, it just comes off as completely irresponsible of Cygnus to ignore what's going on in Maple World when she's literally the sole ruler of the whole planet and a good chunk of her constituents are having their life sucked out of them. The probable reason for this is that the writers didn't feel like resolving all of the problems in the storyline because the KMS director wanted the story to focus or to shift their focus to Grandis. I love the grandest story and everything, but there's no good reason that they couldn't have wrapped up the problems in Maple World the same way that they resolved all of the Maple World class storylines in the aftermath cutscenes. Personally, I'm hoping that these problems resurface somehow during the grandest storyline. There's a strong implication that Darmor has been planning to invade Maple World, and it would be really cool to see people like Arita or the remnants of the Blackwings allying with Darmor, similar to how the High Flora allied with the terrorist group Ebonstar in order to seize Cernium.